Well, good morning. I'm Kyle Bender, Director of Family Ministry. If I haven't met you, but I see a lot of familiar faces here today, so it's good to see you. I'm going to spare you this week. Last week, I brought many of you through a rough game of did it sell on eBay, and we looked at some things, and I don't know how exactly you felt leaving, but I thought today I wanted to just kind of check in with you. I had a great conversation with Hillary at the beginning of this morning about surviving or thriving, and I just wanted to get a quick feel of the room. Over these last couple weeks, as you've been living life, for some of you families, as you've started school, as you've been walking through the news of the day and all that kind of stuff, here's your spectrum. We've got thriving or surviving. How many of you feel like you're in the thriving phase? Things have been going pretty well and are going good for you. Nice. Yeah, I've heard that from quite a few. How many of you feel like you're just surviving and you're just kind of making it? Yeah, I feel that. This last couple weeks has felt like surviving for us. Our kids all started new schools, and so we've been doing that. We've had some emotions and some tears as you start new spaces. So yeah, I feel that. Well, this morning we wanted to kind of begin to wrap up our series on Welcome All. And as you know, we started this talking about the idea that God welcomes all. God welcomes us. And God welcomes the people who are different than us because we are all created in the image of God. And last week we pushed it even further and looked at how people might be different than us and how God would welcome them. And this week we want to actually specifically talk about challenging othering. If you were here in the beginning of for the early service, then you've heard some of that in Emily's sermon. If not, you'll hear it more about that in the next service. But I was thinking about this. In my office I have a little poster that basically a bunch of development psychologists, teachers, educators, ministers, and other people did a project where they were looking at the different phases of a life that a kid goes through. And what are kind of the key questions that they might be asking at each stage of life. And I was kind of looking at this week, and I just noticed something differently that I hadn't paid attention to in a while. And at the very top of it, before you even get into all this, it just says, what if we treated and believed that every kid was made in the image of God? What if we treated everyone as if they were created in the image of God? And I started thinking about the implications of that and all the different labels that kids get at different times, troublemaker, or the good student, or the one who is always up to no good, and all the different things in between. The one who hasn't learned how to use deodorant yet in middle school, or whatever it might be. But all the different labels that people get. And what would be different if you and I really tried to practice what we've been talking about? What if we really tried to practice seeing the image of God in everyone? How would that change things? For us, we want to challenge ourselves in the way we do ministry. What do our environments say when people walk in? Do they feel welcome? Because really, ultimately, this is about a posture, right? This is about a posture. We're going to talk about today, and you're going to see some things where there are times where we struggle with othering, with knowing what to do when someone feels very different than us, knowing what to do when our beliefs clash. And we don't have the time to get into all the things we could talk about today. But really, what we've been talking about is a posture. How do we hold ourselves to truly welcome? We've been talking about hospitality as a practice. And what does it look like to be hospitable? And I started thinking about this, so if we start viewing everyone in the image of God, it made me also think that really in all relationships, there's a space between people, right? So if you're married, you might experience this. There's this between my wife and I, there's a dynamic space between us. And a lot of times that can be taken for granted, go unnoticed, but every now and then one of us can put something into that space. And let's just say for this purpose of this example, Kyle Bender put something negative into that space. And this is now this is a dynamic space where between us now there's tension and there's things in this space. And how we react to what is put in that space determines some of what our next actions are going to be. And so I started just thinking about this space when it comes to othering. How many times in our life there's this dynamic space between us as human beings, and when someone's other than us, we don't know exactly what to put in that space. I think we have a slide that shows some of the things that we might put in that space when it comes to people who are different than us. We might put stereotype, we might put discrimination, we might put assumptions. There might be some narrow-mindedness. And we've seen all these things play out, right? We've looked over this past year, you have seen some of these words play out in very public spaces in our country, right? And we've seen what happens when some of these things get put in that dynamic space. So as we move into our video this morning, we're going to see what the curriculum writer has for us and leads us, and then we'll have some conversation, and then we'll move outside for some breakfast tacos. But just as I was thinking about this othering this week and challenging myself and walking through it, I wanted to remind myself, what would it look like to treat everyone if they were as they were in the image of God? And if I do that, and if I really try to see through those eyes, what might be different about the things that I put into the space between me and another person? And what if some of that space was a posture? Because sometimes I don't know exactly what to put there, but I can have a posture that welcomes. I can have a posture of hospitality. I can have a posture that says, I don't really know what happens next, but I want to put something good into this space. And maybe it's dynamic enough that a relationship develops. And maybe it's dynamic enough that I'm changed and they're changed. And maybe it's dynamic enough that God does something in there, but I don't really know what that's going to be. But I can choose to put something in that space. So we'll see what our curriculum writer has for us today. We'll have some conversation, and we'll go have breakfast. But that's my initial challenge to you this morning. So let's watch this video together.
My name's Lynn Bob. People always wonder how to pronounce my last name, but it rhymes with Saab Cars. So that's a good mnemonic device. So I'm a writer, teacher, Presbyterian minister. The main thing I do right now is writing, and it was a huge privilege to get to write for the Follow Me curriculum. The second lesson involves seeing Christ in every.
We'll see if we have the right one. She tricks you because she does the same intro every time. If you've been here all week, you're like, why is she? We already know the mnemonic device. Why are you telling? But I think they just repeated the intro. So I was like, yeah, we're good to go. But let's see. Well, if we don't have it, we have each other. And we have dynamic space that we can put breakfast tacos into. And we've got relationship and conversation, so we'll see if we'll give them just a second here. Yeah, no problem. That's right. Let's see if we can find it. Anybody? I know, right? Yes, Miss Hillary. Yeah. Yeah, I think, we could skip ahead, Jeff, actually, to the Mr. Rogers video. That might be a great alternative here. I think, yes, absolutely. I think it can be as simple as a smile. Oh, yeah, of course. She said, what is an example of something that we can kind of put into that space between us? She said, I think, is it as simple as a smile? And I do think there is, and this is like the challenge for us, right, is I do think half of it is how you show up. How you show up. And that's why I think posture, like kind of what we're saying, posture matters. So yeah, a smile that is genuine and maybe even looks in their eyes and like, they're used to the fleeting smile or the nervous smile of somebody who sees someone different, but, like looking and smiling and not awkwardly hanging there too long, but hanging there long enough to know you mean it and say hello, I think can matter and can be significant. And then, of course, depending on the level of relationship, then there's other opportunities. And I think the challenge today, if you were in the earlier service, we're passing out these these gift cards and saying, hey, if there's someone you do know past that initial stage, someone that's in your sphere of relationship on some level that is different than you, and you can go and do something else, we have a little challenge for you that we invite you to take part in as an opportunity to go do that for someone that you know better. But yeah, the initial space of just how we carry ourselves, and I think that's how we choose to see the others in the world. Like, what would it do if, and this is the pre-work that you probably have to do, we have to do in that seeing other people as created in the image of God, is for us to actually picture some people in our lives that are different, that we struggle with, and go, how would it be different if I saw them in the image of God? What would that change about it? How would I want to change my posture towards that person? What has been my posture towards that person, and how can I change it? And then next time you interact with them, lean into that a little bit, risk a little bit, have courage a little bit to open up that space with your posture, with a welcome, with a smile, with an invitation, with a conversation. You've got it. Okay, let's do it.
My name's Lynn Bob. People always wonder how to pronounce my last name, but it rhymes with Saab Cars. So that's a good mnemonic device. So I'm a writer, teacher, Presbyterian minister. The main thing I do right now is writing, and it was a huge privilege to get to write for the Follow Me curriculum. And the fourth lesson refers to a word that lots of people have probably never heard of, the word othering. So this idea uses, other, like I might say to someone, oh, bring me that other box. And that's not a verb. We're talking about othering as a verb. So my PhD studies are in communication. And one thing I learned pursuing that degree that just shocked me is that human language has been used throughout human history to other groups of people, whoever it is. I mean, you think of Nazi Germany othering the Jews, but you think about the United States othering African Americans as far back as we can look. You think about right now, Republicans othering Democrats and Democrats othering Republicans. I mean, there's a whole lot of othering going on right now in our world. Even within either political party, people are othering each other over various, you're not tried and true in this area, and so I don't belong with you, you don't belong with me. So one of the tasks of hospitality is to challenge othering. The passage that we use in the lesson is Luke 7, where the woman comes and pours ointment on Jesus's feet and cries and wipes his feet with her cheek.
Everyone remembers Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood.
It's a beautiful day in this.
But not everyone knows that this cardigan-clad king of children's TV, Fred Rogers, was actually a pioneer who challenged racial stereotypes in media. Enter Francois Clemens.
Francois Scarborough Clemens.
And his role as Officer Clemens made him one of the first recurring Black characters on a children's TV show.
When I started, there were 2-3 shows, period, on television that employed a Black character.
Francois grew up during the Civil Rights Movement and times of great racial tension in the U.S.
So when Fred asked me to be a police officer, Fred, are you sure? Do you know what policemen represent in the community where I was raised? And then he started talking about children needing helpers and the positive influence that I could have for young children. My heart opened as I listened to him.
He accepted the role, not knowing he would end up playing Officer Clemens for 30 years. And one of his most memorable scenes is also one of his favorites.
There are many ways to say I love you. It's a very big deal for me to be putting my feet in the water with Fred.
During a time of segregation, the symbolism wasn't lost on Francois.
To say that he didn't know what he was doing or that he accidentally stumbled into integration or talking about racism or sexism, that's not Mr. Rogers. It was well planned and well thought out, and I think it was very impactful. There are many ways to say I love you.
That impact was felt by many, but for Francois, it was personal.
I was in the studio one day. That particular day, he was filming the end of the show. And when he got to the part, he said, "You make every day a special day."
You know how? By just your being you.
And I swear it was like, he was looking right into my eyes. And when the music stopped, I said, "Fred, were you talking to me?" And he said, "Yes, I have been talking to you for years, but you heard me today."
This was really the clip that got me imagining that space between us, and to see, Fred Rogers' intentional way of going about the things that he went about. And we can't control what happens on the other side of that space, right? Yeah, I love that part at the beginning where he's like, "Yes, I've been talking to you the whole time. You just finally heard me." We can't control that, but we can control what goes into that space between us. And we're well conditioned to put things like bias and stereotype and prejudice and other things in that space. So I think there is a challenge that starts with our own selves, as the video said, and it's hard to examine ourselves. But to notice when we feel it, we feel like, "Oh, I'm keeping a distance here. I'm putting a blockade, a wall. I'm putting something between me and another person. What is that? What is that within me? Where does that come from? How can I challenge that and start to rework that?" And I think one way we can do that is to start to view everybody as created in the image of God. When you catch yourself in that space, how do I see the image of God in the other person? And how do I change my posture? How do I, if I feel like I'm putting up a wall, how do I relax my shoulders a little bit? And how do I practice hospitality? And my hope is that as we do that, we will grow in our knowledge, and then maybe we have opportunities like Mr. Rogers to do things in more intentional ways for people that we know and we love, to make them